The late summer evening unfurled like a heavy tapestry as I, Emma Parker, stood at the edge of our newly claimed property. The air thick with the rich, earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil mingling with the resinous scent of distant pine forests. My sneakers sank slightly into the damp ground, the blades of grass brushing against my ankles with a whisper that felt almost alive. The move to Willow Creek, a sleepy hamlet cradled at the rugged feet of the Catskill Mountains, had been thrust upon us by my father's new position at the Agricultural Research Center. My mother, ever the optimist, had framed it as an adventure, her voice lilting with excitement as she said, "Think of all the open space." As if the tight-knit suburban streets we'd left behind, with their manicured lawns and nosy neighbors, were a cage we'd finally shattered. Yet, as I gazed across the vast expanse of farmland stretching toward a shadowy woodland, the horizon ablaze with a sunset that painted the fields in molten gold and deepened into inky shadows, a shiver coursed through me, unbidden and icy, as though the land itself recoiled at our presence. Our new home loomed at the town's outermost edge, the last bastion of civilization before the orderly rows of crops surrendered to untamed wilderness. The house was an aged sentinel, its sprawling structure dwarfing our former residence with a wraparound porch that groaned underfoot like a living thing, its wooden boards warped by decades of weather, and windows that rattled with every gust of wind, their panes clouded with the patina of time. 3 days after our arrival, with my mother buried in the chaos of unpacking the kitchen, her hands deftly sorting through boxes of mismatched dishes while humming a tune I couldn't place, and my father already ensconced in his new role, I found myself restless, drawn by the siren call of exploration. A dirt path, barely discernible beneath the overgrowth, wound between towering cornfields, their stalks rising like silent sentinels, their leaves rustling with a susurrus that seemed to carry faint, indecipherable whispers. The path led me into a small forest, where the canopy of ancient oaks and pines offered a cool respite from the oppressive summer heat, their gnarled branches weaving a lattice that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Armed with my phone, I began snapping pictures of a particularly ancient oak, its bark twisted into grotesque, almost human-like shapes, faces frozen in silent screams or grimaces of agony, their hollow eyes carved by nature's relentless hand. Lost in the moment, I was startled by a sharp snap of a twig behind me, the sound cutting through the forest's hush like a blade. "Are you lost?" a boy's voice called, sharp yet tinged with curiosity, pulling me from my reverie. I turned to find Charlie Thornton, a lanky figure with tousled dirty blonde hair falling into bright blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than his years, his hands buried deep in the pockets of worn jeans frayed at the knees. "Just exploring," I replied, lowering my phone, introducing myself as the new girl from the Miller place, my voice steady despite the sudden thud of my heart. He offered his name with a cautious nod, his stance rigid, as if he were a guard at an unseen gate, his eyes flickering to the shadows beyond. "You're pretty far from the road," he added, his tone carrying a weight that wasn't quite a warning, but close enough to ignite a spark of curiosity in my chest. "Is that a problem?" I asked, a prickle of awareness creeping over me as I noted the isolation. The dense trees, the distant hum of the town fading into silence. He shrugged, his shoulders lifting and falling with a nonchalance that felt forced. "No, just not many people come out this way." His words tumbling out too quickly, too evasively, leaving a trail of unease in their wake. Charlie's offer to show me around came abruptly, a shift in his demeanor that felt rehearsed, as though he were reciting a script he'd memorized under duress. Though I sensed he was withholding something, a shadow lurking behind his blue eyes, I agreed, my curiosity outweighing my caution. He proved a knowledgeable guide, his steps confident as he pointed out blackberry bushes heavy with ripe, glistening fruit, their thorns catching the light like tiny daggers, and a fallen log that served as a natural bridge across a narrow creek, its waters glinting like liquid glass under the dappled sunlight, rippling with the occasional leap of a fish. He knew every trail, every shortcut, his voice steady as he recounted local lore about the best fishing spots and the deer paths that crisscrossed the woods. But whenever we veered east, confirmed by the steady glow of my phone's compass, he steered us away with a subtle urgency, his body angling to block my view, his pace quickening imperceptibly. "What's over there?" I finally asked, pointing toward the avoided direction, my voice cutting through the rustle of leaves. His face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. My family's farm, he admitted reluctantly, his words heavy with a reluctance that hung between us like a fog. After a tense pause, during which his eyes darted to the trees as if expecting an audience, he nodded. I guess you can see it. We walked in silence for 10 minutes, the forest thickening around us, the air growing heavier with the scent of moss and decay, until we emerged into a clearing dominated by a weathered farmhouse. Its clapboards peeled like shed skin, revealing the gray wood beneath, the structure sagging under the weight of decades, while a barn listed to one side, its faded red paint turned to a dull rust that flaked with every breeze. The fields surrounding it were only partially tended, wild grasses and thistles encroaching on the edges, their untamed growth a stark contrast to the orderly rows of corn we'd passed. Along the wooden fence lining the property, hundreds of crows perched in perfect stillness, their black forms a stark, almost surreal contrast against the afternoon sky, all facing inward toward the house, their beady eyes glinting with an intelligence that sent a shiver racing down my spine despite the summer heat. "What's with all the crows?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I took a step closer, the chill deepening. Charlie cut me off, his voice tight and clipped. "They do that sometimes," quickening his pace as we passed, his hand brushing mine as if to hurry me along. The birds didn't scatter. Instead, their heads turned in unison, a synchronized movement that defied nature, their glittering black eyes tracking us with a predatory focus, their silence more menacing than any caw could be. Charlie rushed me past, his breath shallow, barely speaking until the farm faded from view, the trees closing around us like a shield. His responses to my questions, about the farm, the crows, the isolation, were reduced to monosyllables, his lips pressing into a thin line, his eyes averted. "See you around," he mumbled at the edge of my neighborhood, turning away before I could press further, his figure blending into the dusk. "Wait," I called, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet. "Maybe I could visit tomorrow. See your house?" He paused, conflict etching deep lines into his young face, his shoulders hunching as if bearing an invisible burden, then relented with a hesitant, "I guess, after lunch." That evening, helping my mother unpack the last of our kitchen boxes, the clatter of dishes a comforting rhythm, I mentioned Charlie, passing her a stack of plates. The plates slipped from her hands, clattering against the counter but not breaking, her fingers trembling as she caught it. "The Thornton place?" she asked, her voice careful, almost reverent, as if the name carried a weight she dared not fully acknowledge. "Yeah, is something wrong?" I pressed, sensing the shift in her demeanor. She sighed, a long, weary sound that filled the room. "Just old gossip, legends of tragedy, deaths, accidents, crop failures. Some say the place is cursed." Her dismissal was quick, her smile forced, but the unease in her eyes, the way her hands lingered on the plate, fueled my determination to return, to peel back the layers of this enigma. The next day, after a lunch of sandwiches eaten in the quiet of our new kitchen, I retraced my steps, the Thornton farm easier to find in the crisp daylight, though its rundown state struck me with a new clarity. The peeling paint hung in long, curling strips from the clapboards, exposing the gray, weathered wood beneath, while one of the porch steps had rotted through, its edges crumbling under the weight of neglect. The absence of crows today was somehow more unsettling than their presence had been, the silence amplifying the farm's desolation. Charlie answered my knock almost instantly, as if he'd been stationed by the door, his surprise genuine despite our plans, his blue eyes widening slightly. "You came," he said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief, glancing over his shoulder into the dim interior before stepping aside with a reluctant, "Come in, I guess." The threshold seemed to pulse with an unseen energy as I crossed it, the air inside thick with a musty scent that clung to my lungs. The interior was a study in contrasts, dim with heavy curtains blocking most of the sunlight, casting the rooms in a perpetual twilight. Yet the furniture, though old, was clean, its surfaces polished with a care that felt out of place. The walls were lined with family photos, their frames ornate but the images within faded into obscurity. The faces blurred as if time itself had scrubbed them away, leaving only ghostly outlines. "Mom, we have a visitor," Charlie called, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness, and a thin woman with prematurely gray hair emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen. Her apron dusted with flour, her hands wiping nervously against the fabric. Her eyes darted to the windows, a quick, repetitive motion that betrayed her unease, before settling on me with a soft, "Hello. Hello. You must be Emma." Her voice was a whisper, fragile as glass, and her glances toward the glass persisted, as if she expected something to breach it at any moment. "Would you like some lemonade?" she offered, disappearing back into the kitchen with a haste that suggested escape. Heavy footsteps descended the staircase, each creak a punctuation in the tense silence, revealing a gaunt man with hollow eyes sunken into a face etched with lines of exhaustion, his overalls stained with the dark smears of dirt and toil. He wore a frown that seemed permanent, a mask carved by years of hardship. "Dad, this is Emma Parker," Charlie whispered, his voice dropping to a near-silent reverence, as if speaking too loudly might summon something worse. Mr. Thornton barely acknowledged me, his gaze sliding past me to the front door, ensuring it was closed with a deliberateness that chilled me. "The Parkers," he muttered, more a statement than a question, his voice rough as gravel, before he turned and exited through the back door, his presence lingering like a storm cloud that had yet to break. Mrs. Thornton returned with 2 glasses of lemonade, her hands trembling slightly as she handed them to us, the liquid sloshing against the rims. "Why don't you show Emma your books, Charlie?" she suggested, her tone pleading, "But stay inside, please, it's going to rain later." I glanced at the clear blue sky beyond the curtains, the contradiction hanging heavy, the tension in the house palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm, every creak and groan of the old building making Charlie and his mother flinch. Charlie led me to his room, a small sanctuary of neatness amidst the house's decay, its walls lined with shelves of worn paperbacks, their spines cracked and faded from years of use. We talked of school starting in a few weeks, the unfamiliar faces I'd meet, and what life was like in Willow Creek. His voice steady but his eyes occasionally darting to the window. Yet a persistent feeling of being watched gnawed at me, a prickling at the nape of my neck that grew with each passing minute, though whenever I glanced at the glass, there was nothing there, only the still, empty yard beyond. After an hour that stretched into an eternity, I made an excuse about needing to help my mother, the relief on Mrs. Thornton's face as I said goodbye mirroring my own desperate need to escape the house's oppressive aura. That night, lying in bed, the memory of the crows lining the fence, their synchronized gaze, and the Thornton family's strangeness haunted me, a whisper of dread I couldn't shake. I must have drifted into sleep, for I awoke to a soft, persistent tapping at my second-story window. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. A rhythm that pulled me from the depths of slumber, my heart thudding against my ribs. Frozen, I lay still for several seconds, the sound an enigma in the quiet night, before working up the courage to turn on my bedside lamp. The tapping ceased immediately, as if aware of my awakening, and I slid out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floor, approaching the window with a caution that bordered on fear. Pulling back the curtain with a quick motion, I found a large crow perched on the sill, its black feathers gleaming with an oily sheen under the lamplight, its head cocked at an angle that suggested intent. It tapped its beak against the glass again, 3 precise taps, as if trying to communicate, its single shining eye fixing me with a gaze that felt less animal and more deliberate. Transfixed, unable to move, I stood there as the bird continued its rhythmic pecking, its demeanor not aggressive but desperate, like a messenger delivering a warning I couldn't decipher. After what felt like hours but was likely minutes, I reached for the window latch, my fingers trembling, and the moment they touched the metal, the crow spread its wings and launched itself into the night, disappearing into the darkness with a flutter that echoed in my ears. I opened the window anyway, leaning out to search the sky, the cool night air brushing my face with the faint scent of distant rain. But there was no sign of the bird, only the vast, star-speckled expanse above. As I moved to close the window, I noticed them. 3 black feathers resting on the sill where the crow had been, their edges sleek and glossy. I picked one up, running my fingers along its surface, telling myself it was just a feather, just a bird. But as I closed the window and returned to bed, the image of hundreds of crows watching Charlie's farm replayed in my mind, entwined with his mother's nervous glances and his father's hollow eyes, pulling me deeper into a mystery I couldn't yet fathom, unraveling the past. Over the following weeks, Charlie and I fell into a pattern, meeting in the woods between our houses or down by the creek, its waters a constant murmur against the stones. He avoided his farm with a diligence that bordered on obsession, deflecting my suggestions to visit with excuses about chores. His father needing help with the livestock, the fields requiring attention. His voice tightening with each evasion. One afternoon, as we sat by the creek, our feet dangling in the cool water, I invited him to my house for lasagna, the scent of my mother's cooking still lingering in my memory. "Maybe next time," he said, skipping a stone across the surface, watching it bounce 4 times before sinking, revealing angry red marks on his forearm as his sleeve rode up. The scratches were uniform, almost claw-like, their edges too precise for barbed wire, and when I asked, "What happened to your arms?" he tugged his sleeve down quickly. "Nothing, just scratches from farm work, barbed wire and stuff." His dismissal curt, his eyes avoiding mine. I didn't press, sensing a wall he'd erected, his habit of shutting down when pushed too hard a silent plea for distance. School began the following week, and my days filled with new classes and faces, a whirlwind of introductions and unfamiliar hallways. Charlie and I shared history class with Mr. Peterson, a middle-aged teacher with salt and pepper hair and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. His voice a steady drone as he lectured. Charlie kept to himself, sitting in the back corner near the window, his gaze fixed on the glass as if expecting something to emerge from the trees beyond. During lunch on the 3rd day, I overheard a group of girls at the next table, their whispers carrying over the clatter of trays. "Did you see Charlie Thornton's back in school this year?" One murmured, "I thought for sure his dad would pull him out like he did 2 years ago." Another replied, "My mom says I shouldn't talk to him, says that whole family's got something wrong with him." A tall girl with a ponytail leaned in. "My brother dared Jason Reynolds to ride his bike past the Thornton place after dark last summer. He came back crying and wouldn't tell anyone what he saw. My grandpa calls it the death house, says nothing good ever happens there." They noticed me listening, falling silent, exchanging meaningful glances before changing the subject, their words lingering like a shadow. That afternoon, as we packed up after the bell, Mr. Peterson called me to his desk, his voice low. "Emma, could I have a word?" I approached, the other students filing out, Charlie giving me a curious look before disappearing. "I've noticed you've been spending time with Charlie Thornton," he said, removing his glasses and cleaning them with a cloth, his movements deliberate. "Yes, we're friends. He was the first person I met when we moved here," I replied, my defensiveness rising. He nodded slowly. "Charlie is a good student when he applies himself, a bright boy," putting his glasses back on. "But I feel I should mention there are some families in Willow Creek with histories that run deep, burdens best left undisturbed." "You mean the rumors about the Thornton farm being cursed?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. His expression tightened. "I'm not one for superstition, Miss Parker, but history leaves its marks, and the Thornton family has weathered more than their share of tragedy." He picked up a stack of papers, tapping them straight. "Just be careful about the stones you turn over. Some things are buried for a reason." I left the classroom unsettled, his warning a subtle echo of my mother's caution, the implication clear yet maddeningly vague. That weekend, I biked to the town library, a small but well-maintained building with tall windows and wooden shelves that smelled of lemon polish and aged paper. The librarian, an elderly woman with a tight gray bun, looked up from her computer as I entered. "Can I help you find something, dear?" she asked, her voice warm. "I'm doing a history project on local families," I said, opting for a half-truth, particularly interested in the Thornton farm. Her smile faltered slightly. "The local history section is in the back corner, newspaper archives on microfilm. Let me know if you need help with the machine." I spent hours hunched over the microfilm reader, scrolling through decades of the Willow Creek Chronicle, the flickering images revealing a grim tapestry. At first, the mentions were mundane. Thornton livestock winning ribbons in the 1950s, births and marriages announced with faded ink. But as I dug deeper, darker stories emerged. 1963. Local farmer loses entire herd to mysterious illness, describing how all 30 of Elias Thornton's cattle died overnight. Their bodies found rigid, eyes wide, with no explanation. 1978. Thornton crop fails for third consecutive year despite favorable weather. A soil specialist quoted, baffled by the barren patches. 1985. Thornton barn fire claims 2 lives. Farm hands reporting strange noises before the blaze. 1996. Local girl, 10, found dead in well. A brief article noting Amy Thornton's fall into a capped but unfilled well. The third accidental death in 50 years. The last headline chilled me to the bone. Charlie's sister, unmentioned by him, dead at 10. A detail that gnawed at me as I recalled the faded photos. As I left the library, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, dark clouds gathering on the eastern horizon over the Thornton farm. Stopping at a road fork, I watched a vortex of crows swirl above the property. Their unison flight a living storm, tightening and expanding with an eerie rhythm. I pulled out my phone and called Charlie, the line ringing 6 times before Mrs. Thornton answered. Her voice barely audible, "Emma," spoken like a warning, "Now isn't a good time. Charlie can't come to the phone right now." In the background, I heard shouting, Mr. Thornton's voice, indistinct, and a frantic fluttering, like dozens of wings beating against walls. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though it clearly wasn't. "You should stay away for a while," she whispered, her voice trembling, "just for a while until it passes," before the line went dead. I stared at my phone, then back at the churning mass of birds, the vortex diving toward the farmhouse before scattering into the darkening sky. That night, I dreamed of dark shapes circling overhead, standing in a cornfield, dead stalks crunching beneath my feet. A man hanging from a gnarled oak, his crow's eyes and sharp beak speaking in Charlie's voice. "You can't help, no one can. The debt must be paid, blood calls to blood." I woke with a gasp, my heart racing, the digital clock showing 3:17 a.m., my cheek tickled by a feather. Turning on the lamp, I found my bedroom floor littered with black feathers, dozens covering the carpet like a dark, ragged blanket, my window still closed and locked, an impossibility that left me pressing against my headboard until dawn. By Saturday, the anxiety of waiting for Charlie to return my calls had worn me down. My texts unanswered save for a brief meet at Creek, Saturday noon. The morning dragged, each tick of the clock a torment, until I finally reached our usual spot by the creek, finding Charlie already there, sitting on a fallen log, his arms wrapped around his knees. He looked up as I approached, and my stomach dropped. His face ashen, dark circles under his eyes making them appear sunken into his skull, a fresh scratch running along his jawline, red and angry. "Charlie, what happened?" I asked, dropping onto the log beside him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse, standing abruptly and gesturing for me to follow. Instead of our usual path, he turned away from the creek, leading me deeper into the woods where the trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking to block much of the sunlight, the air growing thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. We walked in silence for nearly 15 minutes, the forest closing around us like a living tomb, until I nearly bumped into him when he stopped suddenly in a small clearing. An ancient oak stood at the center, its massive trunk gnarled and twisted with age, its bark etched with patterns that suggested faces frozen in torment. One thick branch extending horizontally about 7 feet above the ground. Hanging from it was a fraying rope, its end weathered to individual strands that swayed slightly in the breeze, a silent testament to some forgotten act. "This is where it started," Charlie said quietly, staring up at the rope, his voice trembling with a weight that pressed against my chest. "Where what started?" I asked, my breath catching. "The curse." He took a deep breath, moving closer to the tree, running his fingers over the rough bark as if tracing a memory. "During the Great Depression, my great-grandfather Jeremiah Thornton was desperate. The farm was failing, his kids were starving. There was a businessman named Alone who owned the property next to ours. He offered to help, food, money, supplies, but in exchange he wanted a piece of our land. I noticed Charlie's hand trembling against the trunk, his fingers whitening with the pressure. Instead of making a deal, he continued, his voice dropping, "My great-grandfather lured a loan out here, promising to show him the land he could have. He brought him to this tree, pointing up at the rope, and hanged him right here, took his money and buried the body nearby." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, the air seeming to thicken around us. "That's horrible," I whispered, the words inadequate. "The story goes that as Alone was dying, he cursed our family," Charlie said, his eyes meeting mine, said as long as Thornton blood flowed, we would know nothing but suffering, that the land would turn against us, that death would follow us through generations. He walked a few paces away, his back to me, his shoulders hunched. "People say it's just a story, but it's not. Within days of Alone's murder, our animals started dying. Healthy livestock dropping dead without explanation. Crops withered in the fields. Birds, hundreds of them, descended on our property, watching the house day and night. A breeze rustled through the leaves above us, carrying a faint, mournful sound. When my great-grandfather realized what was happening, he confessed to the murder, told everyone about the curse," Charlie said, his voice cracking. "Nobody believed him, of course, they thought he'd gone mad from guilt. A week later, he came back to this tree and hanged himself from the same branch." I was silent, taking it all in, the story sounding like something from a horror novel. Yet the pain in Charlie's voice was raw, real. "The curse has followed us ever since. My grandfather lost 2 brothers in a barn fire when he was a kid. His own father died falling from a roof for no reason. My uncle drowned in our pond even though he was a strong swimmer. Mom's had 3 miscarriages and Amy." His voice broke. "Your sister?" I said softly, recalling the library article. He nodded, still not looking at me. "The official story is that she fell into an old well, but that's not what happened." "What do you mean?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "The birds. They're not just birds," Charlie said, turning to face me, his eyes red-rimmed. "They're vessels, spirits of all the people the curse has claimed, including Amy. They're always watching us, waiting." I glanced up and felt my blood freeze. At least 24 crows had gathered silently in the branches above us, their black eyes fixed on our position, their arrival unnoticed until that moment. "They're always watching," Charlie whispered. "They're waiting for the next death." A crow directly above us tilted its head, regarding me with an intelligence that seemed far from animal, perched on the same branch the rope hung from. "We should go," I said, unable to tear my eyes away from the gathering birds. Charlie nodded. "There's one more thing I want to show you." We took a different path back, Charlie walking slightly ahead with hunched shoulders, the forest growing denser, the light dimming as if the trees themselves conspired to hide us. After about 20 minutes, we emerged at the edge of an overgrown property, an old foundation visible through tall weeds, the remains of what must have once been a substantial house, its stones moss-covered and crumbling. "This was the Alone property," Charlie explained, his voice low. "No one's lived here since his death. His family tried to sell it but couldn't. Eventually, they just abandoned it." As we stood there, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I spun around, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. "Did you feel that?" I asked. Charlie didn't seem surprised. "It happens here. Dad says it's Alone, still angry about what happened." We didn't linger, Charlie walking me as far as the cornfields that separated our properties, then stopping. "Now you know why you should stay away from my family," he said, his voice flat. "The curse won't touch you if you keep your distance." "Charlie, I began, but he cut me off. "Please, Emma, just think about it." He turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller as he headed back toward his farm. That night, I sat cross-legged on my bed with my laptop, searching for information about curses, the screen casting a pale glow across my room. Most results were folklore or superstition, tales of voodoo, hexes, generational debts. Nothing that could explain dying livestock, withered crops, or birds that gathered like dark omens. I found stories of curses in different cultures, threads of narrative used to explain bad luck or rationalize tragedy. But Charlie's fear had been real. the scratch on his face a tangible mark, and those crows watching us from the hanging tree a memory that refused to fade. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out toward the eastern horizon where the Thornton farm lay in darkness. No scientific explanation accounting for the chill I'd felt at that tree or the sense of being watched at the abandoned alone property. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called into the night. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence, a rhythm that echoed the tapping at my window, pulling me deeper into the unknown. A week passed, but Charlie's story about the curse stayed with me. A shadow that clung to my thoughts as I went to school, did my homework, and tried to act normal around my parents. At night, I found myself staring out my window toward the Thornton farm, straining to see any sign of those watching birds, the steady drumming of rain against the glass lulling me into a deep sleep. When the frantic pounding began, I thought it part of a dream, something chasing me through dark woods, but the sound persisted, urgent and desperate. Blinking at my bedside clock, 3:02 a.m. glowed in red digits, the pounding coming again, this time clearly from downstairs, our front door. I heard my father's heavy footsteps in the hallway, my mother's concerned voice, and crept to my bedroom door, opening it just as he reached the bottom of the stairs. Through the banister railings, I watched him peer through the peephole, then quickly unlock the door. "Charlie," my father's voice carried, and I rushed down, nearly tripping over my own feet. Charlie stood in our doorway, rain-soaked and shivering. His shirt torn at the shoulder, dark scratches marking his face and neck, his eyes wide with terror. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "I didn't know where else to go." My mother appeared beside me in her bathrobe. "Goodness, you're soaking wet. Come in, come in," guiding him to the kitchen and wrapping a towel around his shoulders. I sat beside him at the table while my father made hot chocolate, the steam rising in the dim light. "What happened?" my dad asked, closing the door against the storm. Charlie's whole body trembled. "It's my mom. She's been different for days now." He stared at his hands. She started talking to empty rooms, having full conversations with nobody. Then I found her collection. Dead birds, dozens of them under her bed in shoeboxes, all crows. My parents exchanged a worried glance, the air thickening with unspoken fear. Tonight, I woke up to her screaming in the yard. Charlie continued, his voice cracking. When I ran outside, she was just standing there in her nightgown, arms outstretched. The crows were landing on her shoulders, her head. She was laughing. A shiver ran through me, unrelated to the cold. When I called out to her, she looked at me with eyes that weren't hers. The birds turned on me all at once, like they were one thing instead of many. I ran. My dad placed a mug of hot chocolate in front of him. "Where's your father?" Locked in his room, Charlie whispered he wouldn't come out, kept saying it was her time to pay. My mom picked up the phone. "I'm calling the police," speaking quietly into the receiver. My dad cleaned the scratches on Charlie's face, some deep enough to leave scars. Their parallel lines like claw marks, a pattern that mirrored the ones I'd seen on his arm. The police arrived 20 minutes later, a female officer and her partner. Their calm, measured tones absurd given the circumstances. "We've sent officers to your property," the female officer said. "They'll call when they've made contact with your mother." Her radio crackled, and she stepped away, returning with, "They've located your mother near Willow Creek. She appears disoriented but physically unharmed." "Can I see her?" Charlie asked. "They're taking her to the county hospital for evaluation. Your father has been notified and is meeting them there." As dawn broke, my parents made a temporary bed for Charlie on our living room couch, and he fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion overcoming fear. I sat in the armchair nearby, unable to leave him alone. My mother touching my shoulder. "Try to get some sleep, honey. Charlie's safe now." But I couldn't shake the feeling that none of us were. Morning brought weak sunshine and terrible news. Mrs. Thornton had disappeared from the hospital overnight, her bed empty during the 4 a.m. check, the window closed and locked from the inside. Search parties formed, police officers, volunteers, and even my father joining the effort, while Charlie and I waited at my house, jumping at every phone call, every knock at the door. The call came at 2:17 p.m., my dad's voice grave. They found Mrs. Thornton's body in the river that ran behind the Thornton property. Charlie, dozing on the couch, sat up immediately, reading the truth on my mother's face. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no," sliding to the floor, curling into himself. Later, at the police station, I overheard officers talking. "Never seen anything like it. Body was in the water less than 12 hours. Shouldn't have been in that condition. Birds don't work that fast." "Those weren't normal marks," the other replied. "Looked like hundreds of them picked clean in some places, right to the bone." I backed away, my stomach churning, returning to the waiting room where Charlie looked up with empty eyes. "They took her," he whispered. I knew they were waiting. Mr. Thornton arrived an hour later, hollowed out. His skin stretched too tight over his skull. His gaze on Charlie flickering with calculation, not grief. "Come, boy," he said, his voice rough. "Time to go home. He can stay with us another night if needed," my mom offered. Mr. Thornton's gaze never left his son. "No, he belongs at home with family." The word family sending ice through my veins. Charlie looked at me, silent panic in his eyes, before his father's hand clamped around his arm, leading him away. The funeral was held 3 days later at the small white church, Charlie in the front row, his father's hand heavy on his shoulder like a restraint. Throughout the service, Mr. Thornton leaned toward Charlie, whispering things that made him flinch, words like blood debts and unfinished business escaping when he turned slightly. Andrew alone stood apart near old oak trees, his wispy white hair blowing in the breeze, his gaze steady on the Thorntons, crows circling overhead in a lazy spiral, unnoticed by others but tracked by Charlie's tense shoulders. That night, my phone rang at midnight, Charlie's name flashing on the screen. "Emma," he said, his voice a terrified whisper. "Dad's been in the barn for hours with the old boxes from the attic. There's an old journal, Jeremiah's journal." "What does it say?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "That the curse demands blood." His voice broke. "He keeps looking at me the way he looked at Mom before everything happened. I think I'm next." A crow's call sounded in the background, clear and distinct. "They're watching the house again," he whispered, "all of them. Dad says only blood can pay." "Charlie, you need to leave. Come here right now," I urged. "I can't." He took my shoes, locked the doors, his breathing quickened. "Emma." The line went dead. I threw on clothes and raced downstairs, my mother catching me with one leg out my bedroom window. "What on earth are you doing?" she demanded. "It's Charlie. Something's wrong." His dad took his shoes and locked him in. I showed them my phone with the disconnected call. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to the Thornton farmhouse, headlights sweeping across the front yard. Illuminating dead crows hung from the porch railings, their wings spread wide like macabre ornaments, more dangling from fence posts. "Stay in the car," my dad ordered, but I was already out, the front windows covered with newspaper and duct tape. As my dad pounded on the door, the hollow sound echoed through the night, no response coming from inside. My mom dialed the police. "This isn't right," while I circled to the side, peering through Charlie's uncovered window. Tapping the glass, I pressed my face against it, Charlie's shadow moving across the room, his face appearing, eyes wide with terror. "Get away from the house," he mouthed, the window nailed shut with crude metal spikes. Behind him, his bedroom door flew open, Mr. Thornton standing in the doorway, a metallic gleam in his hand. Knife or scissors, I couldn't tell. I ran back to my parents as police sirens wailed, the scene unfolding in a blur of flashing lights and stern voices. The police removed Charlie, finding ritual markings chalked on his bedroom floor and a journal filled with rambling notes about blood debts. By dawn, Charlie was released into my parents' temporary custody, Mr. Thornton taken for psychiatric evaluation. Over the next week, Mr. Thornton's behavior grew erratic, released after 2 days, transforming the farm with more dead crows as warnings. "He thinks if they see their own dead, they'll stay away from him," Charlie explained, sitting on our back porch. I began researching the Alone family, the name lodged in my mind since the funeral. The library yielded little beyond property records, but the librarian mentioned Andrew Alone lived on Maple Road. Biking there, I found his cottage neat but sparse, Andrew opening the door with keen eyes. "I've been expecting someone from the Thornton place," he said. inviting me in. Over tea, he revealed the curse stemmed from Alone's dying hatred, binding both families, his father's journal documenting their tragedies. The curse demands the firstborn Thornton child, he said. Amy died instead, unsettling the balance. He wants to kill Charlie, I whispered. He believes he must, Andrew replied, but hatred begets only hatred. Leaving, his warning that both families were at risk, including me, echoed as I pedaled home. 2 days later, Charlie announced his return to the farm, my pleas ignored. By afternoon, he was gone, and I cycled to the farm, finding the barn humming with a generator, an altar inside with photos, feathers, and ritual markings. In the root cellar, Charlie whispered of his father's plan, the line dying as footsteps approached. With Andrew, I confronted Mr. Thornton, the barn erupting in flames as crows descended, claiming him. Firefighters arrived too late, his body mutilated, Charlie entering foster care. 6 months later, as we left Willow Creek, Andrew gave me Amy's diary, revealing her sacrifice, the curse broken. Yet I carry its shadow, wondering, can you face the whispers of a cursed past, or will they haunt your dreams too? Dive into this tale if you dare, but beware, the silence may hold more than you expect.